My phone lit up at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning. One single text from my only child, my Luke. You can't come to the wedding. Carol doesn't want you there. No, Mom, I'm sorry. No explanation. Just those 12 cold words. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Then I did the only thing a mother who has already lost everything once can do. I said absolutely nothing. I quietly canceled every single payment I had ever promised to make for that wedding. Every cent. Every last dollar I had been saving since he was 5 years old. The next morning I woke up to 49 missed calls. 49. And a voicemail from my son that I still cannot listen to without my hands shaking. He was crying so hard he could barely breathe. Mom, what have you done? Carol is screaming. The venue is calling. The caterer hung up on us. Mom, please pick up the phone. I didn't pick up. I simply poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table where I used to feed him pancakes every Saturday, and waited. Because some lessons, my darlings, have to be learned the hard way. Today, I am going to tell you exactly how a 68-year-old widow turned 49 missed calls into the moment my son finally saw who his wife really was. If you have ever been pushed out of your own child's life, if you have ever felt invisible after giving everything, stay with me, because this story is not about revenge. It's about what happens when love finally stops paying the bill. My name is Brenda Collins. I turned 68 last April. I still live in the same little yellow house on Maple Street that Luke grew up in. The same house where I rocked him through fevers, where I sewed his Halloween costumes, where I stood in the driveway and waved until his taillights disappeared the day he left for college. I never remarried after his daddy died. I didn't need to. Luke was my whole world. For 25 years I worked as head teller at First Community Bank. Every paycheck went straight into 3 jars. Groceries, mortgage, and Luke's future. When he got married the first time at 24, I paid for the whole thing. Small church wedding, but beautiful. When that marriage ended after 18 months, I never said a word against her. I just hugged my boy and told him he was still my pride. When he met Carol 4 years ago, I opened my arms the same way. I wanted him happy. That's all I ever wanted. Carol was 29 when they started dating. Pretty in that polished, expensive way. Always perfect hair. Always the right handbag. She called me Mrs. Collins for the first 6 months, then switched to Mom the day Luke proposed. I cried when she said it. I really did. I thought, finally, he's found someone who will take care of him the way I always prayed someone would. So when Luke called me last Christmas and said, Mom, we're getting married in June. Carol wants it big venue, flowers, live band, the works. I didn't hesitate. I told him, anything you need, baby. I've been saving for this day since you were born. I had $87,000 in a separate savings account labeled Luke's wedding and first house down payment. Every time I got a raise, every time I skipped a vacation, every time I bought generic coffee instead of the good stuff, that money grew. It was my promise to him. We started planning in January. Carol sent me Pinterest boards with gold chandeliers and blush roses. I drove 3 hours to meet the wedding planner she chose. I wrote the first check for the deposit, $12,000. Then the venue, $28,000. Then the photographer, $6,500. Then the string quartet, because Carol said violins made her cry happy tears. I never once said no. I just kept writing the checks and telling myself, this is what mothers do. But little things started to feel off. In March, Carol stopped answering my texts. She used to send me selfies of dress fittings, little heart emojis. Then nothing. Luke would say, she's just stressed, Mom. Wedding planning is hard. I believed him. In April, I invited them both for Easter dinner. Carol said she had a migraine. Luke came alone. He looked thinner. He barely ate. When I asked if everything was okay, he said, Carol's family is paying for half the wedding now, so don't worry about the rest of the money. I felt something cold slide down my spine. I smiled anyway. Okay, sweetheart. Whatever makes you happy. May came. 1 week before the wedding. I had already bought my mother of the groom dress, soft lavender, the kind that doesn't wrinkle. I had my speech written in a little notebook. I practiced it in the mirror every night. It started with, when Luke was 3. He told me he was going to marry me when he grew up. Then the text arrived. Tuesday, June 3rd, 7:14 a.m. You can't come to the wedding. My wife doesn't want you there. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down very carefully like it was made of glass. I walked to the kitchen window and looked at the maple tree Luke planted when he was 12. It's 30 feet tall now. I watched the leaves move in the breeze for a long time. Then I did 4 things. First, I logged into my bank account. I canceled every pending payment still in process, the final $9,000 to the venue, the $4,200 balance to the florist, the $3,800 to the band. I called each one personally. I said the same sentence in the same calm voice. I'm Brenda Collins. I'm the mother of the groom. Unfortunately, there has been a change of plans. Please cancel the reservation and issue a full refund to my account. Thank you. Not one person asked why. They just said, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Collins, and did it. Second, I called my attorney, the same one who helped me after my husband died. I told him exactly what happened. He said, Brenda, you sure you want to do this? I said, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He said, then I'll have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. Third, I went to the hardware store and bought the biggest padlock they had. I came home and locked the shed where I kept all the wedding decorations I had been storing. The extra centerpieces, the fairy lights, the guest book Carol had asked me to monogram. I didn't want Luke to be able to walk in and take anything. Not anymore. Fourth, I turned my phone face down on the table and went to bed. I didn't cry. I just lay there in the dark and thought about the little boy who used to crawl into my lap and say, Mama, you're my favorite person in the whole world. The next morning I woke up to the missed calls. 49. Luke. Carol. Luke again. Luke's best man. The wedding planner. The venue manager. My cousin Ruth who lives in Atlanta. Even my old neighbor Mr. Hargrove who never calls anyone. I made coffee. I sat at the table. I waited. At 9:17 the front door flew open. Luke stormed in without knocking. His face was red, eyes swollen. He looked like he hadn't slept. Mom, what the hell did you do? I looked up at him very slowly. I said, Good morning, Luke. Would you like some coffee? He slammed both hands on the table. The venue called and said the entire balance was canceled. The caterer won't deliver. The band won't show. Carol is hysterical. She's saying we have to postpone the wedding, and everyone is going to know it's because of you. I took one slow sip. Then I said, I didn't cancel anything that wasn't mine to cancel, son. That money came from my savings account. The account I filled every time I worked overtime so you could have new shoes. The account I never touched for myself. You told me your wife didn't want me at the wedding. So I decided I didn't want to pay for a wedding I'm not invited to. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Mom, you can't do this. People have already bought plane tickets. Carol's parents put down deposits too. I said, then maybe Carol's parents should pay for their daughter's wedding. Or maybe you should have asked me why your wife suddenly decided your own mother wasn't welcome. He started to cry. Big choking sobs. The same way he cried when he was 6 and his bike got stolen. Mom, I didn't mean it like that. Carol said, she said you make her uncomfortable. She said you're too involved. She said if you come, she won't feel like it's her day. I stood up. I walked over to him. I put both hands on his shoulders the way I did when he was little and scared of thunderstorms. I looked straight into his eyes and I said, Luke, I have spent 40 years being uncomfortable so you could be comfortable. I have spent 40 years being invisible so you could shine. If your wife needs me to disappear on the most important day of your life, then she can pay for it herself. He dropped to his knees right there on my kitchen floor. He grabbed my hands. Mom, please. I'll talk to her. I'll fix this. Just put the money back. Please. I knelt down so we were eye to eye. I brushed the hair off his forehead the way I used to when he had fever. I whispered, You already fixed it, baby. You chose. Now you live with it. I stood up. I walked to the door. I opened it. I said, I love you, Luke. I always will. But I'm not paying for someone to erase me. He stayed on the floor crying for almost 10 minutes. Then he got up. He looked at me like I was a stranger. He said, You're ruining my life. I said. No, sweetheart. I'm saving yours. He left. The door closed behind him. I stood there in the silence. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the coffee cup. But I didn't call him back. I didn't text Carol. I didn't beg. Because the next 48 hours were going to show my son exactly who he married. And exactly who his mother really is. After Luke walked out that morning, the house felt heavier than it ever had before. The silence pressed against the windows like a storm that hadn't quite broken yet. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching his truck disappear down Maple Street, the same way I used to watch him drive off to school. Only this time there was no waving goodbye. My heart ached in a way I couldn't quite name. Not just sadness but something deeper, like the slow realization that the boy I raised might not know me as well as I thought he did. I finally closed the door and went back to the kitchen. The coffee had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. Bitter things sometimes suit bitter moments. My phone kept buzzing on the table. More missed calls, more voicemails I wasn't ready to hear. I turned it off completely and decided to keep myself busy. I pulled out the old photo albums from the living room shelf, the ones filled with pictures of Luke from birth to graduation. I sat on the couch and flipped through them slowly, letting the memories wash over me like warm water on a cold day. There he was at 5, missing his front teeth, grinning in his little league uniform. At 12, tall and awkward, holding the trophy from the science fair I helped him build late into so many nights. At 21, in his cap and gown, hugging me so tight my feet almost left the ground. In every picture it was just the two of us against the world. And now this. By afternoon I knew she would come. Carol. I could feel it in my bones the way old folks feel rain coming. Sure enough, around 3 o'clock, there was a sharp knock at the door, 3 quick raps, impatient and demanding. I took a deep breath, smoothed my skirt and opened it. There she stood on my porch, looking every bit the bride-to-be in her designer sunglasses and flowing white sundress, even though the wedding was falling apart around her. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes were red-rimmed, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. Behind her, parked crooked in my driveway, was the new SUV I had helped them put a down payment on last year. Mrs. Collins, she said, her voice tight and clipped, like she was holding back a flood. We need to talk. I stepped aside without a word and let her in. She brushed past me, her perfume strong and floral, the kind that lingers too long. She didn't sit down right away. Instead, she paced the living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I had refinished myself after the flood in '09. How could you do this? She finally burst out, turning to face me with her hands on her hips. Do you have any idea what you've done? The venue is threatening to sue for breach of contract. The florist won't release the flowers. Half the guests have already arrived in town, and now we have to tell them the wedding is off? Because of you. I sat down in my armchair, the one with the faded floral pattern that matches the curtains, and folded my hands in my lap. I looked up at her calmly, even though my pulse was racing. Carol, honey, I said softly, I didn't cancel a wedding. I simply withdrew the money that was mine to give. You told my son, through him, that I wasn't welcome. So I figured my money wasn't welcome either. Her face flushed deep red. She took off her sunglasses and pointed them at me like a weapon. This isn't about the money. This is about family. About supporting us on our special day. Luke is devastated. He's been crying all day. He says you've never acted like this before. I felt a pang at the mention of Luke crying, but I pushed it down. If Luke is devastated, I replied evenly, maybe he should ask himself why his mother suddenly became unwelcome at his wedding. I've been nothing but supportive since the day you two met. I welcomed you into my home, into my family. I paid for dress shopping trips, bridal showers, even that bachelorette weekend in Nashville you wanted so badly. She laughed, but it was sharp and bitter, nothing like real laughter. Oh please. You act like you've done us some huge favor. Luke told me how you hover, how you call every day, how you always have an opinion about everything. It's suffocating, Mrs. Collins. I just wanted one day, where it was about me and Luke, not about you playing the perfect martyr mother. Those words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard variations of them before. whispered behind hands at family gatherings after Luke's first marriage ended. People who didn't understand what it meant to raise a child alone, to pour every ounce of yourself into them. But hearing it from her, the woman my son chose, that stung deeper. Carol, I said, my voice steady as I could make it, if wanting to be part of my only child's wedding makes me suffocating, then maybe I've been too involved all along. But let me ask you something. Why didn't you tell me this yourself? Why send a text through Luke like I'm some stranger? She hesitated for the first time, her eyes darting to the side. Because Luke said you'd take it better from him. He knows how emotional you get. Emotional. That word again. As if loving fiercely was a flaw. I stood up slowly, my knees creaking a little. 68 isn't kind to joints, and walked to the window. I looked out at the garden I'd tended for decades, the roses blooming despite the heat. Emotional, I repeated quietly. Yes, I suppose I am emotional about the boy I carried for 9 months, nursed through chickenpox and heartbreak, worked double shifts to put through college. But I've never once made your life harder, Carol. Not until you made the choice to push me out. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, but laced with something colder. Look, we can fix this. Just transfer the money back. We'll say it was a banking error or something. You can still come to the wedding. Sit in the back if it makes you feel better. Just don't ruin this for Luke. Sit in the back. Like a guest. Like an afterthought. I turned to face her, and for the first time, I let a little steel show in my eyes. No, Carol. I won't be transferring anything back. And I won't be sitting anywhere at a wedding where I'm not wanted as family. You and Luke made that clear. Now you'll have to figure it out on your own. Her composure cracked then. She threw her hands up, tears starting to spill. You're unbelievable. Do you know how much this is costing us? My parents are furious. They only covered the rehearsal dinner. The rest was supposed to be from you. I nodded slowly. Yes, I do know how much it costs. Because I'm the one who paid most of it already. Over $60,000 gone just like that. Money I saved for years, skipping cruises with friends, driving the same old car so Luke could have what he needed. And now it's clear that what he needs is a wife who doesn't want his mother around. She wiped her eyes angrily, smearing her mascara. Fine. Be that way. But when Luke realizes what a selfish person you are, don't come crying to us. She stormed out then, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. I heard the SUV peel out of the driveway, tires squealing. And for the first time that day, I let myself sit back down and cry. Quiet tears, the kind that come from deep inside after holding everything together too long. But the tears didn't last long. Because that evening, something unexpected happened. My phone rang. It was the wedding planner, Sarah. A sweet young woman I'd worked with closely for months. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. Mrs. Collins? It's Sarah. I'm so sorry about everything. I heard what happened. Thank you, dear, I said, trying to sound composed. There was a pause. Listen, I probably shouldn't say this, but Carol called me earlier in a panic. She was screaming about how you pulled the funding because you're jealous or something. But then she let something slip. She said, if that old bat thinks she can control us with her money anymore. And then she stopped. Mrs. Collins, has she said things like that before? I felt a chill. No, Sarah. That's the first I've heard it put quite that way. Sarah lowered her voice. There's more. When we were finalizing the guest list last month, Carol insisted on removing a few names. I thought it was budget, but one of them was your cousin Ruth. And she changed the mother-son dance song without telling you. The one you requested, Simple Man by Lynyrd Skynyrd, because it was your husband's favorite. She switched it to something else. My breath caught. Luke and I had talked about that dance for years. It was supposed to be our moment. Why are you telling me this, Sarah? Because you've been nothing but kind to me, Mrs. Collins. Paid every invoice on time, always thanked me. And honestly, I've seen brides like Carol before. Start small, then it gets bigger. I just thought you should know. We talked for another 20 minutes. Sarah told me how Carol had been complaining about me for months, how I was too clingy, how my house was outdated, how I embarrassed her by bringing homemade casseroles to dinner instead of wine. Little digs I'd never heard directly. When we hung up, I sat in the darkening living room, piecing it together. It wasn't sudden. This exclusion had been building, slow and deliberate. That night Luke came back. Alone this time. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, hair uncombed. He didn't yell. He just stood in the doorway and said, "Mom, can I come in?" I nodded, and he sat on the couch where he used to nap after school. He stared at his hands for a long time. "Carol's at her parents' tonight," he said finally. "The wedding's off. We can't afford to reschedule. Everyone's getting refunds on hotels. It's a mess." I didn't say anything at first. I just waited. He looked up at me, eyes pleading. "Mom, I told her she was wrong to send that text. I told her you deserve to be there more than anyone. But she's saying you're punishing us. That you never really liked her." I leaned forward. "Luke, do you believe that?" He hesitated. "I don't know what to believe anymore. She's been saying things about how you try to control me with money. How you guilt me into spending time here instead of with her family." I felt my heart twist. Have I ever stopped you from seeing her family? Have I ever said no when you wanted to go on trips with them? No, he admitted quietly. But she says it's subtle. The way you ask about my day. The way you always need help with something around the house. I closed my eyes for a moment. "Luke, I'm 68 years old. I live alone. Sometimes I do need help with the gutters or the heavy grocery bags. But if that's control, then maybe I've been wrong to ask." He rubbed his face. "I found something today, Mom, when I was looking for the venue contract to see if we could salvage anything. In Carol's desk drawer. A folder labeled Post-Wedding Finances. Inside were printouts, applications for credit cards in my name only, a budget that moved all your remaining savings gifts into a joint account she controls, and a life insurance policy on you that she took out last year. Beneficiary, her." The room spun a little. "What?" He nodded, voice breaking. $500,000 policy, Mom. Premiums paid from our joint checking. The one you helped seed with $20,000 when we bought the house. She told me it was for estate planning, but I never signed anything. My signature looks off. I reached out and took his hand. It was trembling. "Luke," I whispered. "Why would she do that?" He looked at me with fresh tears. "I don't know. But Sarah the planner called me too. Told me some things Carol said. And now this. Mom, what if there's more?" We sat there in silence as the truth began to settle between us like dust after a storm. The wedding was the least of it now. Something darker had been hiding in plain sight. And as the night deepened, my son finally started asking the questions I'd been too afraid to voice myself. The night Luke told me about that life insurance policy, neither of us slept much. We sat up at my kitchen table until the early hours, the same table scarred from years of homework sessions and birthday cakes. He spread out the papers he'd brought from home, the folder he'd found in Carol's desk, the printouts that looked so innocent at first glance but felt like poison once you read between the lines. My hand shook as I held the policy document. $500,000. My life reduced to a payout. And there, at the bottom, a signature that was supposed to be Luke's but wasn't quite right, the loop on the L too fancy, the slant off by just enough to notice if you knew him like I did. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse from crying earlier. "I swear I never signed this. She must have forged it somehow." He couldn't even say the word out loud at first. Forgery. It hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire we hadn't seen coming. I set the paper down carefully and reached across the table to cover his hand with mine. His skin was cold. "We don't know the full story yet, sweetheart," I said, even though my mind was racing ahead to places I didn't want to go. "But we need to find out. Quietly. No accusations until we have proof." He nodded, but his eyes were distant, like he was seeing his whole life with her in a new light. "I feel so stupid," he whispered. "All those times she pushed me to take out more insurance, saying it was for our future, for kids we might have. I thought she was just being responsible." I squeezed his hand. "Love makes us blind sometimes, Luke. That's not stupid. That's human." We made a plan that night, simple but firm. First thing in the morning, he would go to the bank, our bank, where I still knew everyone from my years as head teller, and ask for statements on all accounts linked to his name. I would call my old friend Margaret, who retired from the insurance company downtown. If anyone could look into a policy discreetly, it was her. And if things looked as bad as we feared, we'd bring in a professional. Someone who knew how to dig without making noise. Luke left just before dawn, kissing my cheek like he used to when he was little and afraid of the dark. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said at the door. "For everything." I hugged him tight. "We'll fix this together." Just like always. After he left, I didn't go back to bed. I made a fresh pot of coffee and sat by the window, watching the sun come up over the maple tree. My mind wandered back to the early days with Carol. How she charmed everyone at first, bringing flowers when she came for dinner, laughing at my stories about Luke as a boy. But now looking back, I could see the patterns I'd missed. The way she'd steer conversations away from my past with Luke's father. The subtle comments about how old-fashioned my house was, how I should downsize and travel more. The way she'd encourage Luke to put distance between us, saying things like, "We need our own traditions now." By 9 o'clock, Luke called. His voice was tight, controlled. "Mom, you need to see this. I'm coming over." He arrived 20 minutes later with a thick envelope from the bank. We spread the statements across the table like pieces of a puzzle we didn't want to solve. At first, everything looked normal, deposits from his job, withdrawals for bills. But then we got to the older ones from before the wedding planning started. There were transfers. Small at first, a few hundred here and there, labeled gifts or loans from accounts I recognized. My savings. The one I'd contributed to for their house down payment. But the amounts didn't match what I remembered giving. Extra withdrawals routed through a joint account Carol controlled. And then, buried in the details, payments to an insurance company. Monthly premiums for that policy on me. Luke's face went pale. "She's been siphoning money, Mom." Not a lot at once, just enough not to notice right away. Over 2 years, it adds up to almost $30,000. I felt nausea rise in my throat. $30,000. Money I'd earned scrubbing floors on weekends when Luke was small. Money from skipping new clothes so he could have braces. Gone. But that wasn't the worst. Luke pulled out another sheet. A credit report he'd requested on himself. Cards opened in his name that he'd never applied for. Balances climbing. One with cash advances totaling $15,000, taken out 6 months ago. "She said we needed it for wedding expenses," he said quietly. "But I thought it was from the wedding fund you gave us." I shook my head slowly. "I never authorized credit cards, Luke. Only direct payments to vendors." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of it settling over us. This wasn't just exclusion from a wedding. This was systematic. Planned. That afternoon I called Margaret. She met us at her house, a cozy bungalow filled with cat figurines and the smell of fresh-baked cookies. She looked over the policy documents with her reading glasses perched on her nose. "This isn't right," she said after a few minutes. "The application date is forged and the medical exam waiver, someone pulled strings. But more importantly, Brenda, this policy has a contestability clause. If anything happened to you in the first 2 years." She trailed off, but we all knew what she meant. Luke stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his back to us. I could see his shoulders shaking. Margaret lowered her voice. "You need a professional, honey. Someone who can trace where the premiums came from. Check for other policies, look into her background." She gave us the name of a private investigator she trusted. Tom Riley, retired police detective, discreet and thorough. Luke called him from her porch. By evening, we had an appointment for the next day. Tom's office was in a small building downtown, unassuming with just his name on the door. He was a big man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. We laid everything out for him, the policy, the bank statements, the forged signatures. He listened without interrupting, taking notes. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This smells like financial exploitation," he said plainly. "Targeted at elderly family members through marriage. It's more common than people think. But we need to go deeper. Background check on Carol, full history, previous relationships, finances, any legal issues." Luke nodded. Whatever it takes. Tom quoted a reasonable fee. I insisted on paying it myself from the money I'd pulled back from the wedding. Consider it an investment in the truth, I told Luke when he protested. The next few days were a blur of waiting. Luke stayed with me most nights, sleeping in his old room. We didn't talk much about Carol. He'd left her a message saying he needed space to think, and she'd responded with a flood of texts calling him ungrateful, saying I was poisoning him against her. He showed me a few. They were vicious, blaming me for everything, threatening to tell everyone what a controlling mother I was. But we focused on the investigation. Tom worked fast. 5 days later, he called us into his office again. What he laid out on the desk changed everything. First, Carol's real name wasn't Carolyn Whitaker. It was Carolyn Wilkins' maiden name. She changed it legally 5 years ago, after a marriage in Nevada that ended quickly. Her ex-husband? Deceased. Heart attack at 45. And guess who the beneficiary was on his life insurance? Carol. A policy taken out 18 months before he died. Luke went still beside me. There's more, Tom said gently. Before that marriage, she was engaged to a man in Colorado. Older gentleman, widowed. He passed suddenly, fall down the stairs. No foul play ruled, but the insurance payout went to her as fiancé under a joint policy. She moved shortly after. My mouth went dry. How many? 3, Tom said. 3 relationships in 10 years. All with men who had assets or family money coming in. All ended with the partner dying unexpectedly. Policies in place each time. Total payouts over $1 million. No charges ever filed, clean on the surface. But the pattern. He slid photos across the desk. Carol younger with different hair, standing beside older men at events. Smiling the same polished smile. Luke made a sound like he'd been punched. She targeted me, he whispered. Because of Mom's savings. Because she thought there was more inheritance coming. Tom nodded. Likely. And the wedding? Probably a way to lock in access before anything happened to you, Mrs. Collins. I felt the room tilt. All those times she'd encouraged me to eat certain foods, saying they were healthier. The new vitamins she brought over last Christmas. The way she'd pushed Luke to update his will after the engagement. Luke stood up, face ashen. We need to go to the police. Tom held up a hand. Not yet. We have patterns but no direct proof of intent to harm. The forgeries, the unauthorized accounts, that's fraud. We can start there. And I've got a contact who can freeze those credit lines. Alert the insurance company. We spent the next hour planning. Luke would gather more documents from the house while Carol was at work. I would file a report on the identity theft. And Tom would keep digging phone records, emails if we could access them legally. As we left the office, Luke stopped on the sidewalk and hugged me so tight I could feel his heart pounding. Mom, if anything had happened to you. I held him back, my strong boy who suddenly felt fragile. It didn't. Because we're paying attention now. But as we drove home, a new fear settled in. Carol wasn't going to let this go quietly. She'd fight. And the wedding drama? That was just the tip of what she was capable of. The real storm was coming. The days after Tom Riley laid out Carol's past felt like walking through a fog that was slowly lifting, revealing a landscape I never wanted to see. Luke barely left my side. He moved back into his old room officially, bringing just a duffel bag of clothes and his laptop. We didn't talk about making it permanent. We both knew it already was. The house on Maple Street, once too quiet after he moved out, now felt full again. Full of questions, full of fear, but also full of the bond that no one could take from us. Carol tried to reach him at first. Calls that went to voicemail. Texts that started sweet. Baby, come home, we can work this out. And turned angry when he didn't respond. You're letting your mother destroy us. She's always hated me. Then threats. If you don't come back, I'll tell everyone the truth about how controlling she is. About the money she hoards. Luke showed me each one, his face growing harder with every message. By the end of the week, he blocked her number. Tom kept working. Every afternoon he'd call or stop by with updates. Phone records showed calls to an insurance agent in Nevada, the same state as her first quick marriage. Emails recovered from a cloud account. Luke still had access to revealed conversations with a lawyer about asset protection and beneficiary changes. And then the biggest piece: bank transfers from Carol's personal account to a private investigator, not to check on Luke but on me. Background checks, credit reports, even medical history requests somehow obtained illegally. She was planning long-term, Tom told us one evening as we sat in my living room, waiting for the right moment. The wedding was probably meant to solidify everything, make her the grieving daughter-in-law if he didn't finish. He didn't need to. We went to the police. A detective named Harris took the case. Financial fraud, identity theft, suspected insurance fraud. He was kind but cautious. Patterns are strong, he said, but we need ironclad proof for anything more serious. Those past deaths were ruled natural or accidental. No exhumations without cause. Still, he froze the suspicious accounts, alerted the insurance companies, and started building a file. The wedding date came and went. June 10th. I woke up that morning and made pancakes the way I used to on Luke's birthdays. We ate in silence at first, then he said, "I can't believe I almost married her." I reached across and touched his arm. "You didn't. That's what matters." But Carol wasn't done. 2 days later, she showed up at the house unannounced. Luke was at work, and I was in the garden pulling weeds when I heard the gate creak. There she was, dressed like she was going to a luncheon, pearls, heels, hair perfect. But her eyes were wild. "We need to talk," she said, marching up the path. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my hands. "There's nothing left to say, Carol." She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. "You think you've won, don't you? Turning my fiancé against me. Spreading lies. But Luke will come back. He always does. And when he does, you'll be the one left out in the cold." I looked at her steadily. "He knows the truth now. About the money. The policies. The men before him." Her face flickered just a moment, but it was enough. "You have no proof," she hissed. "Just the paranoid ramblings of a lonely old woman who can't let go of her son." I smiled softly. "The police have proof. And they're talking to authorities in Nevada and Colorado. Patterns, Carol. They see them too." For the first time, fear flashed across her face. Real fear. She took a step back. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I asked. "Why don't you ask your lawyer?" She turned and left without another word, heels clicking fast down the path. I watched her go, my heart pounding but my hands steady. That was the last time I saw her in person for a while. The real confrontation came a week later, at the venue. The beautiful old barn outside town where the wedding was supposed to happen. The owner, a kind man named Mr. Ellison, had felt terrible about the cancellation. When he learned bits of the story from the detective, he offered the space for a family meeting. He said it might help close the chapter. Luke and I knew what it really was. A chance to present everything with witnesses. Tom arranged it. Detective Harris would be there, off duty but ready. Carol agreed to come. Probably thought she could charm her way out. Convinced Luke it was all a misunderstanding. The day arrived warm and sunny, mocking the darkness we carried. Luke and I drove together. He was quiet, gripping the steering wheel tight. "I keep thinking about what could have happened to you," he said finally. "If I hadn't seen that folder." I placed my hand over his. "But you did. And we're here now." The barn looked beautiful still. Fairy lights strung even though no wedding would happen, wildflowers on the tables from leftover orders. About 20 people were there. Mr. Ellison, Sarah the wedding planner, Detective Harris in plain clothes, Tom, and a few of Carol's friends she'd insisted on bringing for support. Carol arrived last, with her parents trailing behind looking confused and worried. We gathered in the main room. Carol sat at a long table, posture perfect, smiling like this was just a mediation. Luke sat beside me. Tom stood. He started calmly. "We're here to clear the air. Luke has questions. Evidence has come to light." He laid out the documents one by one. The forged insurance policy, bank statements showing transfers, the credit cards, photos of Carol with previous partners, printouts of emails. Carol laughed at first. "This is ridiculous. Luke, baby, your mother is obsessed." She's making this up because she can't stand losing control. But as Tom continued, showing the detective's notes, the frozen accounts, her smile faltered. Her friends shifted uncomfortably. Her mother gasped at the photos. Luke spoke then, voice steady but breaking. Why, Carol? Why the policy on my mom? Why the lies about the money? She turned on him, eyes blazing. Because she had you wrapped around her finger. Always mom needs this, mom needs that. I was trying to build a future for us. And she was hoarding everything. I spoke for the first time. I gave freely. Everything I had. Until you decided I wasn't welcome in my own son's life. The room went quiet. Then Detective Harris stood. Ms. Wilkins, your legal name, we have enough for charges. Fraud, forgery, identity theft. And we're coordinating with other states. Carol's face crumpled. She looked around for support, but her friends were backing away. Her father looked ill. She stood suddenly, chair scraping. You can't prove anything. Those men died naturally. I loved them. Tom said quietly, we'll let the courts decide. She tried to leave then, but Harris stepped in front. You're coming with me for questioning. The arrest happened right there in the barn. Handcuffs clicked. Carol sobbed, mascara running, screaming that we were ruining her life. But no one moved to help her. Not even her parents. Luke didn't watch. He turned to me and buried his face in my shoulder like he was 10 years old again. I held him as they let her out. The aftermath wasn't clean or quick. Charges were filed. The insurance companies investigated. 2 of the past deaths were reopened. Exhumations ordered when toxicology raised flags. Traces of substances that shouldn't have been there. Carol lawyered up, but the evidence piled higher. Plea deals were discussed, then rejected when more victims' families came forward. Women who'd lost fathers, husbands to the same pattern. She went to trial 9 months later. Guilty on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and in 2 cases manslaughter. 25 years. Luke testified. I did too. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Sitting in that courtroom watching the woman who almost became my daughter-in-law unravel. But it was necessary. The money she took, most recovered through restitution. The policies voided. Life went on. Luke healed slowly. Therapy helped. He started dating again a year later. A sweet teacher named Emily who loves my casseroles and calls me mom without hesitation. They're engaged now. Small wedding. My backyard. I'm paying for the flowers only. The rest is theirs. I still live in the yellow house on Maple Street. The maple tree Luke planted is stronger than ever. I garden more, travel a bit with friends I'd neglected. I speak at senior centers sometimes about financial abuse, about watching for red flags in the people our children love. People ask if I'm bitter, if I hate her. The truth is more complicated. Pity her in a way. A life built on taking instead of giving. But mostly I'm grateful. Grateful for that text message that woke me up. Grateful for 49 missed calls that brought my son home. Grateful that love, real love, won in the end. Because family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. It's about who shows up, who stays, who protects. Luke and I, we're closer than ever. He stops by most evenings, helps with the yard, stays for dinner. We talk about everything now, no secrets. And sometimes on quiet nights, I sit on the porch and think about what I almost lost. Not just money, not just a wedding, my son, my life, my peace. But I didn't lose them. Justice found its way home. And so did we. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt pushed aside, ever wondered if standing your ground was worth it, know this. It is. You are worth protecting. Your love is worth defending. And sometimes saying nothing and closing the door is the loudest thing you can do. Thank you for listening to my story. From my heart to yours. If this moved you, imagine sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like Brenda's remind us, we are never alone. And truth eventually always finds its voice. Like this video and subscribe to this channel for more stories like these. See you in the next one.